Hello, lovely listeners. We
Hello.
are back. It's going to be a little bit of an odd schedule coming up.
You may have noticed that there was no podcast last week.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got a ton of little different life things happening. So we are going to be kind of figuring out a new schedule, figuring out how we can make this sustainable on ourselves, all that fun stuff. So yeah, please just bear with us. We'll try to keep everything figured out as much as possible.
Yeah, it'll probably be an episode every 2 weeks for the next little while at least, and then we'll have to kind of figure it out from there.
Exactly. But today we're back with spooky season. We've got cemeteries and we've got some weird burial traditions. Yeah, so let's just maybe jump into it. Get right into our fun facts.
Well, my whole script is actually just a bunch of fun facts this time. So
Okay,
my
well,
fun fact is like I've got three, and we're gonna like that'll be my whole side of the script.
mine is kind of all fun facts as well, but because I'm not really fully talking about this side of cemeteries, I wanted to just quickly pop in that the Wadi al Salam cemetery in Iraq is actually the world's largest cemetery to date. It has been used since the 7th century and still accepts the dearly departed.
Wow. Is it just like ever expanding or something? Like, how do
Well,
they host that many?
so it does cover just over 9 kilometers squared or 3.5 square meters of packed in mausoleums, catacombs, and crypts.
Oh,
It
wow.
is thought
Okay.
to
So it's all
hold,
like half of it's underground.
yeah, so it's thought to hold millions of bodies, and it's one of the three major Islamic pilgrimage spots. People
Huh.
from all over Iran and Iraq have chosen this spot to be buried in the middle of a holy city, and in recent years, that has expanded to include people from all over the world. And then, but like the site has also like seen a lot of damage from wars, especially the Iraq War from 2003 to
Mm.
2011.
Aw.
But yeah, like it is huge. And if you like, I'll put pictures of it up on the Instagram because it is gorgeous as well. Like, it's just like a sea of concrete, basically. But yeah, so let's get into kind of a little bit of the history of cemeteries. And then I have two cemeteries that I'm talking about that have something in common with each other that makes me very happy. So, we've all seen a cemetery at least once in our lives. It could be a family plot at the family home that has been passed down for generations. It could be a random field with layers upon layers of tombstones, either standing up or laying down. Or it could be a gothic gated park that has horror story after horror story from those who have walked it in the dark with their hearts pounding straight out of their chests. Cemeteries have stoked people's imaginations for as long as we can remember. Most of us see them as sad places to rest our loved ones, or scary places full of ghost stories and haunting memories. But cemeteries used to be very different from how we see them in today's society. Let's start at the very beginning with how the word itself even came to be. Listeners and Kat will know just how much I love to share the etymology of words. So here we go. There are multiple origins to the word cemetery, but the general consensus is that it was first derived from the ancient Greek word koimeterion, which means sleeping place. It,
Okay.
it also has roots in the 12th century medieval Latin word for graveyard, comaterium, and the 14th century Old French word cimetière, which translates to place set aside for burial of the dead.
So just like a mishmash of like a bunch of different languages, as per usual.
Yeah. This is just the basic first usage, as the English in the 15th century had like other words for it as well.
Right.
But in the early days of cemetery use in England, burials were strictly under the jurisdiction of the church.
Right.
They weren't what we are used to seeing still, though. Rather than single graves per person, most bodies would be buried in mass graves that would sit until the bodies decomposed enough. They would then be dug up and the bones would be moved to ossuaries in the church walls or buried under the floors of the church.
So they decompose the bodies and then just bury the bones?
Yes.
All right. I mean,
I'm curious as to how long it took before they would do that because, like, you're building a mass grave. So where are
yeah.
they putting the bodies? How long
So
are they holding on to the bodies? Like, what are they considering as a mass grave?
is it like an open grave? Like, are they just like throwing a bunch of bodies in a hole, or
No, I think
like
no, because they would be
does
dug
it
up
get like
again.
covered?
So like they would put in like so many bodies, I guess. Then
Yeah.
put the like your dirt back over it for it to
Let it simmer for like at least 24 hours.
no longer than that.
Like, well, yeah, but
And then they would dig it up again to then remove the bones.
okay. That seems like a few extra steps. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why not just bury the whole body in the first place?
I don't
I have
know.
questions. All of this extra handling of like decomposing bodies, like it kind of makes sense why there were like so many plagues and things. Like,
Well, that comes up. But first,
okay,
for people who don't know, an ossuary is
right,
basically a box that can be put in a wall or larger box with other boxes.
right, okay.
It was literally a space saver, as these boxes are much smaller than a coffin. For example, there is a stone memorial to French soldiers in Turkey that holds many remains but takes up about the same amount of room as like a regular coffin burial plot.
That would be why they bury just the bones rather than the whole bodies. Okay, to save space. Okay, I kind of get that.
One of my favorite ossuaries is actually more or less a church of its own. The Sedlec ossuary is found underneath of a functional church in the Czech Republic and is literally decorated with the bones of approximately 40 to 70,000 skeletons. This includes the massive chandelier, which contains at least one of every bone found in the human body.
Imagine being the guy who got turned into a chandelier.
Well,
Like
multiple
just
people are in the chandelier.
but like but you know what I mean?
It
Like
takes a
dying
whole
and
new
then like
meaning to like
being
Beauty and the
in
Beast with like the living.
oh no. But I mean like imagine like dying and being in the afterlife and then just like watching someone like take your body apart and like add candles to it. Like wouldn't that feel weird? Like I feel weird about that.
I don't know. I think it'd be kind of
And
cool.
like well obviously you think it's kind of cool. But like that's exactly your vibe. But I don't know. I feel weird about that. Like, I'm cool with like organ donation and stuff like that. Like, I'm totally fine with that concept. But for some reason, the idea of my bones being rearranged makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Fun fact, the original Dungeons and Dragons movie trilogy from the early 2000s filmed inside of this ossuary.
Fitting.
Next year, we are getting a reboot of this series, which I'm excited for, and I wonder if they also decided to film in this ossuary because that'd be fun. But back to our friendly cemeteries. In these original cemeteries, people of higher social significance were usually given a large, well documented plaque inside the church to mark their burial spot. The next important people were buried closest to the church, then fanned outward in a strict order of importance. Many of the older cemeteries that we can visit today still have this social status order.
It kind of reminds me of like ranking your friends on MySpace. Like a little bit.
Yeah. So I know that one of the cemeteries that I personally frequent with history tours definitely has this, as the people who were integral to the building of the city and gave the highest donations to the church are buried the closest to the church. Including, so one of the guy who used to ring the bell for the church all the time, he's buried in like a certain spot, just under, like, just so that like at a certain time of day his grave is right underneath of the shadow of the bell tower, like of where the
Oh,
bell
that's
is,
neat.
because they're like, well, he's such a huge part of our church and stuff, so he gets to be buried here.
Oh, that's neat. I like that.
Yeah. So, but then those who weren't of as great significance are buried farther away, and some don't even have headstones, or their headstones are not well taken care of.
Uh,
So, for example, there's a family that I've researched where this is super evident, even inside the family itself. The parents and their youngest son, who died in his teens, have these beautiful headstones that are glossy and well taken care of. One of their daughters is buried further away from these headstones and doesn't have one, while the other daughter, who is one plot above her sister, has a blank, dull stone that is barely visible anymore as it's sunk into the earth. The only
So you know who
way,
the favorites were. Damn.
right? The only way to tell that it's their plots is by following the mapping of the cemetery and like watching as to like where the visible headstones are in order to solve this puzzle.
Aw.
There's like
Oh no.
there's even ones where like the concrete like where they're like the ones that have like the concrete over top of like the full grave, and like the concrete's literally breaking so that there's actually like a hole that you can actually almost, if you don't watch your step properly, you can actually almost step into there.
That's okay. New nightmare unlocked. Can you? No.
It's
No, thank
actually
you.
I enjoy walking this cemetery, but yeah.
I do too, but I don't enjoy falling into this. Like
Only your foot's going in, not the rest of you. Like you're not fully going in.
I don't trust that at all. If it can crack enough for my foot to fall through, it can crack enough for me to fall through. I don't care. I don't trust that at all. I'm just saying, I don't want to be walking down through a cemetery, through like a history tour or whatever, and then just like falling into someone's coffin. No, thank you. I would rather not.
Yeah. So, in Europe, the population grew enormously in the early 1800s, and burials became outlawed.
What? Like you're not allowed to bury bodies at all anymore?
So, the cemeteries were overflowing, and people were getting extremely ill from the various diseases that came from the poorly buried dead.
Yeah.
Any kind of flood would literally wash layers of coffins and skeletons into the nearby neighborhoods.
Bro, what? Okay.
So, one way that the government would deal with this problem was to exhume bodies and move them into catacombs, like the one in Paris that holds approximately 6 million people's skeletons.
Good Lord. Okay.
Yeah. Soon, burials would also move to outside the city limits in order to keep the infections and overcrowding at bay. A lot of these burial grounds were then repurposed after being in use for a while by removing the headstones and turning the land into public parks or building infrastructure on top of them.
Okay. That sounds like a great way to get haunted real fast, but all right. If that's what you want to do, I guess that's your business.
Well, today, many homeowners who buy like new parcels of land have to watch carefully if they're going to like be digging or anything, as it's likely to find human remains. And then the plot would then be treated as a burial site with new rules put in place for the renovations. So there's like people who will be like, okay, we're just not going to dig here because it would then cause like months of delays because they have to basically figure that out. And then it's either that they rebury it and you just can't dig there. Like you have to then move around the body.
Yeah.
Or they or they excavate the body properly, they do all the research to figure out who it is, and then rebury them somewhere else.
Yeah.
But like it's a huge problem.
Kind of the ideal situation.
That if you buy something and then like especially over in Europe, it's like a big problem for homeowners that they're like that there's like a lot of people who are like, we're just not even gonna renovate.
That's one of those things that there's no way that they could have known the implications that their decision would like have for like forever future generations.
Yeah.
But like holy.
Well, and like some cemeteries today still kind of do stuff like this because there's some cemeteries where if the grave has been there for a certain amount of time and they watch and see if the grave has been like taken care of by family or if any flowers or anything come by, like they watch and see like, okay, is there like a lag basically? If there is, then they will dig up, remove the headstone, either dig up or leave the body there and then just resell that plot and add or replace with somebody newer because they're like, there's nobody to mourn we need space. We'll just,
So just throw out the headstone and just bury someone on top of the body that's already
I'm
there,
not
or
sure exactly,
like,
like, I think so, I think some will maybe dig it up, or they will like dig up,
but
remove the
then what if they
coffin, just put the bones down there or whatever, like,
But then what do they do with the one that was there? Like, what do they do with the body that was there before?
I
Like,
don't
if they
know.
dig it up, where does it go? It has to go somewhere.
Well,
Where
it
does
would
it
just be the
go?
bones. It would just be the bones by that point, no matter what. So they might
Right.
just have the bones in something else, or I don't know. But like there's cemeteries that will do that. They will
But
repurpose a grave because they're
what
like, we don't
happens
have
to the
enough room.
bones? Do they turn them into chandeliers?
Maybe.
Oh Lord. Can you imagine? I feel like there would be some like serious backlash if someone was just like
Probably not,
secretly.
because um with the bones and stuff, you never know what kind of like diseases and stuff like that may still be
Mm,
on the bones. So you have to be
right,
like
that's so
super
true.
careful. So like they'd have to really clean the
Yeah.
bones or whatever, right? But like you have to be like super careful when you're handling human bones.
Mm,
Because like in my forensic anthropology class, like we had to always wear gloves
right.
and stuff, right? Even though like the bones had been super clean because they were like the bodies had been donated for this purpose.
Right.
So then it's
Even
super
still.
cleaned and stuff, right? But you still have to wear your gloves because you
Take
don't
everything out.
know,
Yeah, fair enough.
right? And then like as soon as we would have any, like we'd be working with the bones, there was no food allowed in the classroom. So like so it was like a 3 hour class,
Okay.
right? So we'd have like an hour and a half, a break, an hour and a half ish. Um,
Right.
so like if we were working with the bones in the last half of the class, we could eat and stuff beforehand because they would have already cleaned the tables well enough since the last class using the bones.
Right.
But then we weren't allowed to eat or anything for the rest of the class once the bones were out. If we were using the bones early in the class, then we
Right.
weren't allowed to eat. Basically, like we had to go out of the
For the rest
classroom.
of the class.
We're recommended to
That makes
extremely
sense.
wash your hands,
Yeah.
even though we had gloves.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Like as far as just like keeping things sterile and like protecting yourself and also
Yeah,
protecting the bones from being contaminated with something and then throwing off the entire study, right? So
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we were basically the bones we were used that each table would have like their own set of bones that
hmm
we used every class, and we were learning how to look at the bones to see what kind of diseases might the person have had. Like, did they have any
mm,
spinal like deformations, stuff, right? Learning how to age a person, gender a person, and ethnicity a person, like just using their
right.
bones only,
Right.
kind of a thing. So like that was what we were mainly doing, and like these bones were being used constantly for that. Like we weren't really like doing anything
Like
to
actually
them
doing
other
use to
than
use them.
like,
Just using them to learn.
yeah, like reconstruct the human skeleton on your tables.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so these rural cemeteries became a huge hotspot for the 1800s society. Rather than what we see today, these cemeteries were treated as public parks. Having a picnic at your loved one's grave was a popular weekend outing, and many would take long, leisurely strolls through the curated park paths. So the cemetery in my city that I just talked about like a little bit ago is actually laid out this way and still used as a popular walking path with like the local residents. The idea of having a meal with your loved ones was quite common in most European countries, but it was relatively new to the US. Like,
Mm.
kind of a thing, right? Sadly, the practice got a little out of control in the USA, and it was banned due to the throngs of people and the amount of litter left behind after the meals.
Yeah. Oh, come on. Like,
Yeah.
that was such a nice thing. Why can, like, get it together, people? Like,
So this brought on a rise in public parks that did not involve the dead, leaving cemeteries to
mm,
be almost forgotten by the most part. Many
aw.
communities are now opening the cemeteries back up with respectful rules in place so that people can enjoy the historical sites and the park atmosphere. But
Okay.
cemeteries were not always idyllic places where one could break bread with their loved ones in the afterlife. Some cemeteries were the sites of riots and literal vampire hunts.
That doesn't surprise me like at all. Like, I mean, we still do that kind of stuff today. Like, I'm not like,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. We call it ghost hunts now, but still.
So yes, there are two very well-known incidences of these vampire hunts. Actually, one is very well known, and one is actually not as well known. So the one in London, England is very well known, and the one in Chicago, USA is not as well known, and you'll kind of find out why in a second here. I sadly could not find an example of a vampire hunt in Canada, or I would be at that cemetery so freaking fast. But we do have, like, vampire, like, there's been cemeteries recently found where people buried their loved ones as if they were vampires, like, so, like, with bricks in their mouths and stuff like that, like...
I'm talking about that with the strange burial
Yay!
practices.
Always vampires. Every episode we need to have
Always
some
vampires.
connection to a vampire.
Always vampires. All spooky season long, baby.
Yep. So let's talk about the vampire hunt at the Long Gone Cemetery in Lincoln Park, Chicago first.
Okay.
This cemetery actually got lost to time due to a few major events that happened in Chicago around the time that it was built. Burials started here in 1843 and stopped around 1866. City officials wanted to use the land for more park spaces, so many buried bodies were removed and taken to other cemeteries in the area. While this was being done, the Great Fire happened in 1871, destroying almost everything that was still in the cemetery at the time.
Oh no.
Now there is only one mausoleum left standing / visible of the cemetery that it used to be, the Couch Mausoleum. This was built for Ira Couch, who was a successful business hotel man. Like, he ran a pile of hotels in Chicago. No one knows for certain why it was left intact, but it is suspected that it was too costly to move it.
Interesting. Okay.
Nonetheless, the site became even more well-known in 1888 for having vampires running amok.
Why? Okay, wait, where did that come from? Like, I feel like it was like, okay, there's one mausoleum left. That makes sense. We just had this massive fire that destroyed everything. Sure. Like, how did it go from that to vampires so fast?
So, during this time, as we've discussed a little bit before, beliefs in the supernatural were extremely high. A man named Albert Thelstrom was the justice of the peace in a local neighborhood, and he would entertain his fellow folks with tales of vampires, but presented as true life stories. Another local man stood up one night and claimed that his children were killed by spirits, and a vampire had been haunting him for years. These stories were to sell a particular type of varnish that he produced himself, and claimed would reveal otherworldly spirits, especially the Lakeview vampire, if it was rubbed on mirrors.
So, the dude said that some vampire killed his kids. This man definitely murdered his children.
Spirits killed his children. He was being harassed and stalked by the vampire.
Spirits killed his children, and he's being stalked by a vampire. This man killed his children. Like he was investing. If he had kids to begin with, this man definitely did it. Like,
well, he was known in the community, but I think his kids probably at this time also, they could have died from just like an influenza, like that went through, like,
fair enough,
right? Like the 1800s version of COVID.
Fair, but like, I prefer my conspiracy theory a little bit better than they just got sick and died.
I'm pretty sure if he had killed his own children, they wouldn't.
Pretty sure he killed his kids, yeah.
Because he was kind of in the house of the justice of the peace, telling these stories.
Like, fair, but also, like you said, everyone's superstitious. Yeah. So, like, if there's any way to get away with killing your kids in the late 1800s, it's to say a ghost did it. Like,
yeah. Well, but he also wanted to sell his varnish that You could rub on a mirror, and then if you looked in the mirror, it would show you the spirits and the Lakeview vampire if they were nearby.
So basically, it just makes your mirror cloudy so that you start seeing things. Cool. Great product. A 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Also, like, even if he didn't kill his kids, like, exploiting the death of his children for profit is disgusting behavior, and that's 0 out of 10. Like,
Yeah. So several people at these story times believed it and did purchase some of the varnish. Results
obviously.
varied, and the interest in vampires did die down. Until one Friday night when a man named Claes Larson didn't return home. His wife waited up all night, fearing that the vampire got him. The next day, the entire neighborhood was on the hunt, and a local group of children searched the old graveyard, certain that the vampire would have Larson held hostage inside the creepy mausoleum, and they called themselves the Vampire Hunter Group.
That's the exact kind of stuff that I would try to get away with as a kid. Like, that's absolutely, if the whole town's like looking for a missing person and we have to be involved, we're definitely vampire hunters now. Like,
well, the wife did also tell the whole town that she believed that the vampire got her husband. So,
well, okay, like
the wife
enough,
started
but,
it. The kids just took on.
to like team up with your friends and be like, we're the vampire hunters. Like, it's like that's kind of cute. Like, I want like a Nancy Drew style like series of chapter books for kids written based off of these kids. I think that's adorable.
So on the Sunday of that weekend, Larson's wife then reported him missing to the police, and the vampire rage rekindled. Until Larson gave his wife a heart attack and caused her to faint by returning home suddenly that evening.
So he was out with his mistress. She was like, vampire got him. And then he was like, shit, I've been drunk all day.
So he returned home from a weekend binge drinking, unaware of the panic that he incited. No mistress. There was no mistress. He was just out binge drinking.
To believe that.
And got himself a little, like, too out of it all weekend. And
he got hammered, yeah.
And was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't...
Bro got hammered. Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't know that I was inciting a whole vampire panic.
I was close, okay? I was close. Mistress or no, I was close.
Yes, you were very close. So, while it was exciting for the people of Lakeview, it wasn't nearly as exciting as a tale as the Highgate vampire in London.
Okay.
Do you have any guesses of when the Highgate vampire panic was?
By the fact that you're asking me, I'm going to assume it's more recent than I suspect that it was. So I'm going to say 1930s. No? When?
It was actually around the same time as last week's episode. Yes, that is right. North America had the Satanic Panic, while England had a vampire panic.
The 80s?
Well, like...
That's so much more recent than I thought.
So, like, a little bit earlier. So, like, more at the start of the...
ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, like, 70s. I thought the 60s, like, that was my first thought, but I thought that would be ridiculous. Like, there's no way there's a vampire panic in the 60s, but, like, the 70s?
Yeah. So on Halloween night of 1968, a group of teenagers visited a different cemetery that was also a public park and vandalized it with occult-based graffiti. They also disturbed one of the graves, piercing through the coffin into the body's breast with an iron stake made in the shape of a cross.
That's not... Okay.
Fast forward a year and a half into early 1970, and a man by the name of David Ferrant wrote into a local newspaper about his experience in late 1968, where he passed Highgate Cemetery and saw a gray figure he swears is based in the supernatural. In this article, he asked if anyone else had seen it. Multiple people wrote in about a variety of ghosts that they had seen in the cemetery and the lane next to it, including a ghost riding a bicycle, a few female ghosts. Yeah. I think there's a couple of child ghosts as well, but like a variety of ghosts.
Than just the one guy.
Not just, yeah.
Interesting.
One man named Sean Manchester claimed that the gray figure that Ferrant had seen was none other than a vampire. The media latched right on, as they tend to do, embellishing the
Naturally.
story to add the fact that this was a vampire king who practiced dark magic from his home inside the cemetery.
Wow, guy got a promotion real fast. Went from vampire to vampire king.
Yep. And very good with dark magic, apparently.
Alrighty.
So both men who claimed to see the so-called vampire stoked the media attention as they began a rivalry on who would find the specter and banish it back to where it came from.
So were they all just like high or like what? How did? Okay.
It's
Sure.
kind of like
All right.
it's kind of like today's where it's like, "Oh, hey, I can use social media to become famous."
Just
They're like, "Hey,
riding
look,
off
we
the
can just
hype.
use this and become famous."
Just completely riding off the hype. Like,
Yeah. So, Manchester's first move was to announce that he would be holding a séance on Friday, March 13th, 1970.
I don't know that a seance will get you a vampire, but it will get you possessed. So, like,
Well,
have
and they
fun, I guess.
and like they somehow chose like the Friday, like they chose like the right timing that they could do it on a Friday the 13th of that year.
Oh my
Like,
God. That, like, that's gotta be, like, that has to be on purpose. It's some, like,
I think so.
how,
I think that they literally looked at a calendar and
so
were like, "When
lucky.
can we stoke this vampire thing? Oh, hey, look, there's a Friday the 13th coming up. Let's do it for this Friday, like, for this time."
Like, yeah, like, it's like one part luck that there was a Friday the 13th near enough that it made sense, and one part just like, guys, come on, please.
So ITV did a series of interviews with all those involved, and it aired earlier that evening. Within 2 hours, a massive mob of so-called vampire hunters from all over London swarmed the cemetery. Police were there to try to calm the mob, but they climbed the locked gates and went over the walls in order to get in so they could be the one to stake the Vampire King.
Bro, when there's like hundreds of other people there, you're not gonna be the one. Your odds are too low. Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
Like, and and also I love that it's just like a group of random people who are like, Vampire King? Yeah, I could take that. Like, the
Right?
confidence, the audacity.
So, bodies and graves continued to be tampered with over the next few months, with both original vampire whistleblowers being charged with minor infractions for their own involvement. The grounds of the cemetery are absolutely stunning, with the Gothic designs to the mausoleums and tombstones, as well as being a wonderful nature reserve that's run by a local charity organization.
Nice.
There are hundreds to thousands of famous British people buried at this cemetery, including Karl Marx, Abraham D. Bartlett, who's known for selling the elephant Jumbo to P.T. Barnum, Adam Worth, a criminal mastermind who is thought to be the inspiration for Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and George Eliot, whose real name was Mary Ann Cross and wrote major like novel works under her male pseudonym.
Yeah.
And that's like very few people compared to the actual like full on lists as to who's buried between the two different ones. But I'm like, these are the ones that I'm like, I think most of us will kind of know and are interesting. I'm like, because when I saw Abraham D. Bartlett, I'm like, who the heck is this? And I'm like, oh, you sold Jumbo to P.T. Barnum. And now you're like, considered a celebrity. Like, because of this vampire craze, only the dead, their loved ones attending the memorial, or those willing to pay to do a guided or self-guided tour are admitted on the grounds.
Right.
They are honestly the most beautiful grounds I've ever seen, to the point that I am working on basing a small cemetery in the Disney Dreamlight Valley game after the greenery and gorgeous willow trees with the mossy older tombstones.
Oh my god. Of course you are. I knew you were building a cemetery. I didn't know it was based on a real one. That's so cool.
Yeah, no, this is like, I freaking adore this cemetery. Like, I will be paying to do one of these tours
Next
because
time you're in Europe.
it is so gorgeous and I just want to go wander it. I will be posting photos to the onto the Instagram page, or you can also follow the link to the official cemetery website, because like it's just fucking beautiful. So yeah, that's all I got for you about cemeteries for this episode. We haven't got to mix in a little bit of vampire folklore. There are so many cemeteries that I could talk about, but since we're in spooky season, I kind of wanted to focus it down on ones that are apparently haunted by vampires.
Of course.
There's like so many, including like the one that was recently found. Like there's a lot of cemeteries that are apparently like had vampire hunts happen in them. Even Lafayette's cemetery namesake is apparently haunted by a vampire from Transylvania.
Like, not even just a vampire, but like the most stereotypical vampire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, Vampire King is at least a little creative. Like, it's not just a vampire, it's the Vampire King. It's not just any vampire. Like,
He's from
like,
Hotel Transylvania.
It's like 90% of vampires.
Yeah. So as I said, I'll have links to find out more about like other vampire haunted cemeteries, as well as the top 10 of like the world's largest cemeteries. But my main takeaway is that cemeteries are not scary places unless you make them out to be. They are places for quiet reflection and even great places to learn about some of the common people in history. Next time you have the chance, I do suggest taking the time to walk through one of the older cemeteries near you, or even like on your next trip. Find a gravestone that speaks to you and do some research on the person and their family. Like, you never know what you might find.
True. Yeah. There are a lot of like interesting people, and we've talked about this before, that history kind of just like forgot because they didn't do anything like revolutionary, but their stories are still important, just like yours, just like mine.
Exactly. Like with the family that I researched before, like they had such tragedy, but then one of their kids who did survive, they became our province's first prenatal nurse. Like, they had a couple kids who died of severe illnesses. The son accidentally killed himself with a gun when he was trying to put it away because they had vermin problems on their farm. The other one died in our local psychiatric hospital at the time. But they did have one who became like the first prenatal nurse in in our province, and literally was saving lives, where she was hopping on planes to our northern tip to save a baby's life. Like,
and that's important, and that's the kind of stuff that you're never going to read in a history book, that you're never going to find from those history pages on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. Like, those are the little stories that I really enjoy hearing.
Yeah.
And are so much
and it gives you
harder
both
to come
sides.
across.
Like, it gives you the tragedy and the good. Most of the time, you're going to read about one or the other.
Yeah, but like, life comes with both.
Exactly. But yeah, now that we've talked about the cemeteries, let's find out some weird ways that people get into the cemeteries.
So I started this script looking for like weird funeral traditions, in the sense of things that like happened, and that happened like relatively commonly. And I ended up, like, my first example like is that, but I found two other examples that are much more just like cultural practices that I found really intriguing. So this is like, I'm kind of rebranding it a little bit. It's not so much weird funeral traditions as it is like non-North American funeral tradition.
Makes sense.
So, right? So just kind of like alternative funeral traditions, I guess.
Okay.
Like, from my perspective. So the first one fits in the weird category, though.
Yay.
because this is my vampire one. So I was, yeah, this is what I was expecting to find when I was looking into this, and I was hoping for more stories like this. Um, in northern Poland, the body of a 17th century woman was found buried with a scythe positioned over her neck and a padlock attached to her toe, and this happened only just recently.
Yeah.
Um, we don't know very much about her yet, but we know she was buried in a silk scarf, which implies a higher status. We know that she died in a time where paranoia around the supernatural was rampant as well, which, you know, is a good chunk of European history, but whatever. The scythe positioned over her is positioned over her neck so that if she tried to sit up, her head would be cut off or at least damaged, and the padlock was supposed to keep her from leaving. This would have been placed after she died. This method may be unusual, but it was common for precautions like this to be included in the burial of people who are suspected by the community to come back as undead. As Ashley meant, kind of like the brick in the mouth thing. So other methods included, but are not limited to, bodies being cut in half down the middle, the head being sliced off, stakes pinning down the corpse, legs broken or cut off, burying the body face down somehow would stop them from getting up. I don't totally understand that one. Cremation or crushing the body with a stone. So with this woman, the scythe is actually kind of the tame option. Like, at least they didn't mutilate her body.
Well, I know
And
that
that's
you can also do
probably because of her status.
they do like the brick in the mouth. There's been ones that have been found with like garlic around their necks or whatever, and cages of like a metal that are around their chest, basically.
Yeah.
Or you can still see like yeah, as you said, like the stake through the heart and stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, the poor person. Like, what if they were not actually dead? Like, you know, like how many times did you hear about the ones where it's like that they're afraid that they're gonna be buried alive?
That's okay. So
Like,
okay, maybe this is my fun fact. So there was a thing in cemeteries, they used to have bells.
Yeah.
That would be, yeah, so there would be a string going from inside the coffin to up above ground, and with like a little bell attached, so that if a person was accidentally buried alive, then they could ring the bell and the groundskeeper would come and dig them up and like free them.
Yeah, there's Duncan Sheik, who wrote Spring Awakening. He did like a mini musical that you can get like the soundtrack for. And one of the characters is a guy who is afraid of being buried alive. And so he always had a bell around him or something. And he basically like he would like almost cry wolf kind of a thing because he was so paranoid. And then he actually did end up being buried alive by accident.
Oh no.
And he was ringing the bell and nobody came for him because of his issues.
Because he would always go on about it. I feel like I would be like more careful to check on someone if they were telling me that they were completely afraid of being buried alive. Like, I'd be like,
I don't know. It's such a good one. Like, I definitely recommend it. I'll make sure to try to put that in the show notes too, because it is just an amazing soundtrack that I'm just like, wow. But yeah, like that was like a whole thing, like a whole song is about this guy.
just like getting buried alive and just getting stuck. That's horrifying. So this begs the question. So she was buried with a precaution. The precaution was kind of like a tame option, considering what it could have been. She's probably a lady of status, so that's probably why. So why did they think that she'd be undead? So there's a couple theories for her specifically. One was that she had been accused of being a vampire. Like we said, paranoia around that was pretty big in Europe at the time, so it's possible. She also had what historians described as a large protruding tooth, which, wow, can't even escape like criticism and body shaming and death if that is what happened.
She wasn't a vampire, she was Winifred Sanderson.
She's a witch! That's why she's coming back from the dead, because she's a witch.
Yep. Not a vampire.
Sorry?
Not a vampire. They had the wrong supernatural.
They had... Yeah. Yeah, and like you can see it from the skull, like, but like I'm curious about like how visible it would have been with like flesh on her face, but you know. So in this case, this woman, like if it was the case that she was accused of being a vampire, this woman can kind of serve as a warning that status wouldn't have saved you if you were accused. Like it didn't matter how high up you were, if you were accused of being a vampire, you're still at risk.
Yeah.
It also brings up the point that women were accused or suspected of being involved in the paranormal at a higher rate than men. Think of the witch hunts. And there's a whole discussion about the patriarchy to be had here. Otherwise, she could have been thought to be a revenant, which is not necessarily a vampire, but just like a more general undead person, a vaguer concept. Not quite zombie, not quite vampire, but just someone back from the dead.
Okay.
They were usually thought to be people who either lived violently, died violently, or just weren't buried in the right way. In this case, that implies that she either, lived or died violently, rather than like the burial option. Professor Marin Rady, who's studying her, suggests that it could have been something as simple as dying violently by falling off a cart, which is a pretty big range of options. Yeah, that counts as a violent death because you're dying by a violent injury.
I'm like, then how many other people were buried this way? Because I'm pretty sure falling
So
off of a cart would
many.
be fairly common.
So many, so many. A common option, like the padlock around the toe, was not unusual. So like so many. Like this is why we find so many bodies with like cages and all the things that we talked about before, is because yeah, like so many people. Anyone who died by like essentially injury
Yeah.
in that case could be thought to come back, not necessarily as a vampire, but as a revenant.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's a pretty big range of options to go from vampire to fell off a cart. But that's kind of all that we have about her so far. She is being studied by a team of historians in Poland, so maybe we'll hear more about her in the future.
Hopefully, because I would like to know more.
Hopefully. She hasn't been totally identified yet either, so she's very much a mystery woman.
I would like to be part of that investigation team. Please and thank you. If
I'm gonna
anybody from
move to
that
Poland.
investigation team is hopefully listening to this podcast, I volunteer to help.
I volunteer as tribute. So yeah, so that's the kind of thing I was thinking of when I picked this topic. That specific story especially. But I found some really interesting cultural burial practices as well, and I like alternative burial options. So I decided to go a little off script and talk about those because they are fascinating to me.
Sounds good.
I narrowed it down to two that I personally found particularly interesting.
Okay.
So the first one is the Tibetan sky burials or bird burials. All right. So the majority of Tibet is Buddhist, and they believe that after death, the soul has left the body and the corpse is after a period of time, just an empty leftover shell, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever seen Tibet or pictures of Tibet or anything, but there is a lot of mountains and a lot of cold.
Yeah.
And that makes burying and cremating bodies really, really difficult. So as a result of this whole combination of these things and probably a handful of other things as well, they developed the practice of sky or bird burials. The corpse, remember, empty shell, not a person anymore. This is going to sound gruesome, but keep that in the back of your head as context, right? So the corpse would be wrapped in white cloths and prayed over for days or weeks, kept in a corner of the house where the family was expected to go about their days peacefully in order to ensure a peaceful passing into the afterlife. So once the soul had time to pass and the body was, empty shell state, the body was brought to a temple on the mountain, and the flesh was separated from the bones and cut into pieces while the bones were crushed by a few workers who were kind of like trades level workers, if that makes sense. They're kind of it was just, it was their job. The flesh was left to be eaten by vultures, and the bones were meant to go back into the earth. That's why they were crushed, so that they would get reabsorbed into the earth. It was considered an is considered an honorable, generous, and humble way to dispose of your body after you'd left it, as you were feeding the vultures as well as any birds that came along after the vultures left. You're giving back to nature by providing nutrients and preventing other small animals from being eaten by the bigger birds. Because, you know, they're full of you, so they don't need to go hunting for mice. So while it looks gruesome, like and it very much does look gruesome without context. But what you're left with is like actually kind of a really wholesome practice.
Yeah, it's kind of like the tree, like the newer kind of way where you can be like decomposed and you can become like a tree or whatever. It's almost kind of like
Yeah,
an idea of that. But like when you said it sky burial at first, I was like thinking of like a balloon that like gets like sent up into the air, and I'm like, that would be a, like it's like what comes up, like what goes up must
that's
come down.
originally.
That would be a
Yeah,
very odd thing to wake up in the morning to, or like to have fall on you from the sky. Like this ain't Dorothy's house, folks.
you just end up in Wonderland somehow.
But like that makes more
Or
sense
Oz.
that as to
Like,
what you said. Is I'm like,
yeah.
what are they doing?
I
Like,
said sky. Okay, no, here's the horrific thing. I said sky burial and then assumed that they were just throwing people off of cliffs. Like, that's like,
well, because then as you're saying that like their flesh is take and then their bones ground down, I'm like, okay, maybe it's like that. Then like almost like when people have like the ashes of somebody and then they blow it out over like from like the mountaintop or something. I'm like, that sounds normal. Like that sounds
right.
right. But then
Yeah,
like that
no, it's they
like
use
what
the
you
flesh of their
describe like what you
body
described
to.
doesn't sound like a sky death to me. Like bird, I understand because they're eating
That's
you, but
yeah, that's basically that's kind of roughly how it translates is sky burials because the birds are eating you and then going up into the sky, I guess. Like,
gotcha.
mhm. So yeah, so I think this like I actually got quite endeared by this. I actually think it's a really wholesome way to go. Like
Yeah.
it's like obviously quite graphic, but yeah, but this is a private event. Only people who personally know the deceased watch the process, and it's used as a time to teach the younger people about the reality of death, that it isn't something to be feared, it's just a natural transition. It was pretty expensive, so those who couldn't afford the whole ceremony would just lay their deceased loved ones out on a high platform dedicated to that. And more or less the same process would happen, but it would be more kind of like just just the birds. Um,
Yeah.
so we don't know exactly how old this practice is, but we know it's hundreds of years old, probably thousands. But the earliest record that we have of it is a 12th century Buddhist treatise.
Treaty? Like
Treaty? No, not like treaty. It's like Treatise.
treatise then, I think.
Treatise. Treatise. Kate learns how to pronounce words today.
Isn't that
Um,
every episode?
well,
Like I
yes.
love you, but that's like every episode.
I can spell it. I just don't know how to say it, okay? Yeah, 12th century Buddhist treatise. Yes. Known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's been some speculation about this book and the validity of this book, and but the description of the practices are like have carried through to what we've seen in more recent history. Tibet did have to make some laws, like it still exists. You can like if you're a Tibetan citizen, you can still do this, but they did have to make some laws, kind of adding structure to kind of like the parameters about how you're allowed to go about this, where you're allowed to do this, who's allowed to do this, things like that, to kind of keep it safe.
Yeah.
So there's been kind of more regulations around it in that way, but it does still happen. So yeah, lastly, the one that I wanted to talk about is a little bit more local to us, where like it's North American, but not European North American. So it's a practice that we see in the Haida Nation. So that is for people that don't live near us and don't know where kind of we're talking about in the world. Like West Coast North America, like right along the coast. I don't know exactly how far it extends to down in the States, but I know it's like kind of a good chunk of the coast in BC.
Yeah.
And the islands. So Yeah, they had a variety of funeral practices that we see commonly practiced around the world: cremation, burial of remains, burying treasured items with remains. From what I could find, it looks like they varied a bit depending on where or who you are from. And it didn't look like they liked going into detail about it. Like it was kind of like sacred. It's not necessarily information that the entire world needs to know. So this is like a really brief overview. Um, and that's kind of like the more private side of it.
Yep.
So yeah, and which area or who you're from, by that I mean like which area or like kinship group. But I really like how they honored their leaders. That's kind of the more public facing side of it, right? So when a chief or otherwise like high ranking person passes away, like, you know, your VIPs, an artist will carve them a mortuary totem pole with a cavity inside. The remains of the person are placed inside a box, which is then put inside the totem pole. So, for example, Chief Skedan's mortuary pole in Stanley Park in Vancouver. It was originally raised there around 1870, and it had a cavity at the top of the totem pole where the remains were placed and then covered with a board to protect them from the elements. The pole stood for nearly 100 years before a Haida artist had to carve a new one in 1964 to take its place. There's still a memorial plaque with an image of the original pole and information about the imagery you see on the pole. At the top is the moon, the chief's crest, then a mountain goat, then a grizzly bear with two tiny figures in its ears, symbolizing Chief Skedan's daughter and son-in-law who stood up the original totem pole. Below the grizzly bear is a whale at the base of the pole. And I just think this is really really interesting and really beautiful. Like I knew that totem poles were like a sacred thing. Like, you know,
Yeah.
again, practices vary between groups and stuff, but generally speaking, I knew that they were like a sacred thing and that there was like a spiritual element to it. So I think that like taking your leader, like, you know, spiritual and, you know, all kinds of leaders, and kind of honoring them in this way was just like really impactful.
Yeah.
Like you take this thing that's like already like so meaningful to your group and then you make them one with it. And I really, really like that.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of interesting because it's very much of like an indigenous form of like an ossuary,
Yeah.
right? That I'm
Yeah.
like, it's kind of interesting how they've already been doing stuff like that, and then so have your European Caucasian people like for like a very long time. That this is like that is an interesting like cross.
How
Um,
like people from around the world can develop fairly similar practices
yeah, yeah,
before they've even had any way of connecting. Yeah.
yeah,
I think it comes kind of from like the whole world has always dealt with the base problem of what do we do with people after they die, right?
yeah,
So there's a finite, like there's a lot of options. There's very, very many options, and they're going to be different depending on where you are and what your circumstances are. And like, you know, are you seafaring? Does a water burial make the most sense? You know, and to that, the sky burials make a lot of sense.
yeah,
Like, there's a lot of different things that will play into like what sort of develops as a practice, but there's only so many like options at the end of the day,
yeah.
right? So
Well,
it
like,
makes sense that people would come to the same conclusions.
yeah, because I'm like we can't really do the whole totem ossuary kind of a thing because that would be insensitive, right? But
Well,
it's such
yeah.
an interesting idea of a burial that I'm like that is super
I think it's yeah,
vindicative
like
of their culture.
mm, yeah, like and this is like for like high ranking people as well. So it's like to be honored enough to be buried in this way
Yeah,
is really, really special. So yeah. Yeah, so these are yeah, and so these, you know, totem poles, they last for like a long time. Like they are, for anyone who doesn't know, I feel like this is one of those things where it's like common knowledge here, but then I forget that we have like listeners from around the world who might not know. But totem poles are based out of, or like they're not based, like they're carved directly out of like logs of like cedar, I think I saw was the like that's the one I kept seeing. But again, obviously depending on where in North America you are, like
Yeah.
it's carved out of giant trees, right? So it's all just one log that they're carving all of these figures out of. So like eventually it's gonna, like it's wood and it's being exposed to the elements, so like eventually it's gonna have to come down and be replaced. That, you know, the one that I talked about that it stayed up for nearly 100 years feels very impressive to me. I don't know how long they usually last before they need to be replaced, but um like clearly the longevity is like a good long time, maybe not quite as much as cement, but
Yeah.
like that's still a substantial legacy.
No, totally.
Like that's really neat.
I did want to ask because of like what we're talking about today.
Mm.
Have you thought about what kind of burial and stuff that like especially because now we've been researching cemeteries and
Hmm.
burial traditions, like have you thought about like what kind of burial you would want?
Yes, I have probably a little bit too much, but like,
Hey,
and I've
same
like,
here, so
I think it's no, but genuinely, I think it's really important. If there is a type of burial that you want, then you like, you need to talk about it. Like, you have to tell your loved ones because if they don't know, that's not the kind of burial you're gonna get. Like,
well, no, especially at
I'm
like our age when it's like we don't have wills that we can put it in.
right, but like we could and we should. And Ben and I have talked about like getting our wills together for like a long time, but we just have never gotten around to it. But we really, really need to. I like the idea of green burials. They're getting more and more common.
Yeah.
I they got a little bit trendy not like that long ago, where basically you're buried in some kind of compostable material, whether it's a like a compostable box, like not one of these fat. Okay, so these fancy coffins or like caskets cost thousands of dollars. They're varnished and stained and like, you know, they're meant to stay in one piece for a long, long time. There's padding on the inside. There's
Yeah.
like metal decorations. Like they are like they're and you're just burying it, right? So your family ends up spending thousands and thousands of dollars on this big fancy casket that's not going to dissolve back to the earth, and you're just burying it. Like no one's going to see it after like a day. I have never fully like understood that because I've always thought that like I'm dead at that point. I'm not in that body. I don't need it to be cushioned.
Yeah.
Why, like I can't feel whether it's soft or whether it's hard or like,
It's
you know,
all
that doesn't
it's all for the
make sense
living.
to me.
Like that's the only
It's
thing. It's
it's
all
all
for
for
the
the
living.
living. But then it's also not though, because it's all for the tradition, because the living, like the people who have to front that cost are going to debt over like funerals.
Yeah.
Like that's surprisingly common in North America, is that like they're so expensive. I don't ever want like, you know, assuming Ben is still around, right? When I pass away, I don't know which one of us is gonna die first. It's a race. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's fine. I'm fine. No, but like, you know, Ben and I have talked about like, well, if you die first, if I die first, like, how do you want to go? How do I want to go? And like we've talked about, like the last thing that I want is for him to go into debt to bury me. I feel like that's nonsensical. Like it doesn't cost that much to give someone. I just want like a simple, sweet memorial service kind of thing. And then like I don't want anything elaborate. I don't want anything crazy fancy. Like even like our like, and this is very on brand for me. Like even our wedding was not that like crazy elaborate or fancy or anything. It was like very DIY. It could have been so yeah. So like I want just like a simple biodegradable. Like I'm okay with it being a box. I don't like, I feel weird about being buried in a bag. Like some people are cool with that. It's fine for them. But like just like a simple, unvarnished box,
Yeah.
buried into that, right? Um, None of this like preservatives getting pushed through my veins or anything like that. Don't want any of that. Because that is just for viewing, right?
Yeah.
That's for open casket viewing. That's to keep the body preserved long enough for the friends and family to see. But that, like, those chemicals go back into the earth when you decompose, right? So I don't want that. Um, Simple box, just me. I'm like okay with organ donation. And I want to be buried in whatever cemetery will allow me to have a willow tree planted over my grave. Um, because I'm dramatic as hell and they're gorgeous. They are kind of symbolic to me of like childhood memories that were innocent and fun and adventurous. And it would be so much more meaningful to me to have a tree kind of like representative of who I am. Like it brings life back into death.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And it feels so much more like alive and warm than like a concrete or a cement tablet over my grave, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe like a plaque or something so you know what the tree is for and you don't just willy-nilly cut it down someday. But like but I like a headstone has always felt so cold and distant, and a tree feels so much more like comforting to me.
Yeah.
Like I've always felt very at peace in nature, right? So to bring that element into it for me makes a lot of sense. So when I saw that they were starting to get like trendier and stuff, like first of all, I was like, you're allowed to do that. You have control over how you're buried, which like, yes, obviously you do, but like, you know, we all have to come to a point where we realize this about various things.
Yeah. No, there's
Um,
a newer cemetery right beside like one of like the super historic cemeteries, and
mhm.
they have like it's like all like a nature kind of a thing, so you can pick like what type of tree do you want, or do you want a beehive, or do you want like or like and like you can say like okay, I want flowers that to be planted that are
Mm,
like ones that butterflies and bees and whatever are more attracted to and stuff like that,
I
which I'm like
like
that is
that.
nice.
That's really sweet. I like that a lot. But yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I know that cremation is significantly cheaper than like the whole open casket, like
Yeah.
funeral, like yeah,
Oh yeah.
casket coffin situation. The
Yeah.
traditional casket coffin situation. Um, I like yeah, yeah. I don't know. This cremation doesn't seem like such a good fit for me because like it's getting burned down into nothing, and then like you can spread the ashes of the people that you love, but like you're really not supposed to. It's like super illegal because it's kind of the equivalent of just hiding a body somewhere, but like you can.
Yeah.
And that can be really meaningful for some people, and that's like totally fine. I don't have anything against that. um Personally, besides the illegal hiding a body thing, but
My
um
family
but
friend
I
of
also
ours, when her husband died, he got cremated,
mhm.
and she kept his ashes in a closet where when she would be angry with him, then she could just give him a good kick and then she'd be okay. Which is like, I can't yell at you anymore, therefore.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
Oh,
like, that sounds like you.
oh, oh no. Yeah, no, like I don't. I wouldn't want to end up being like a decoration on someone's mantle, though. You know, like,
No.
and again, like if that's what makes sense to you and your loved ones, then like nothing against anyone else choosing that for themselves. But for me personally, I don't. I don't want. I want like something with a little bit more impact than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I went even cheaper with my burial plan.
Mm-hmm. What's yours? Just like
So,
dig a hole somewhere and bury you straight into the earth.
no, I want my body to be donated to a body farm where they
Okay.
do like where they take like already naturally dead people, and
I like
put
how you emphasize that they don't kill people.
just to be on the safe side, um, and stuff, right? And then they put them into like various, like they put like the bodies into various situations,
Hmm.
like one situation per body, kind of a thing, um, and stuff, right? In order to see how does a body decompose, how does this affect this, right? How long would the body last for, kind of a thing in like this situation, with this type
Right.
of burial or whatever, right? In order to help figure out things for criminal investigations and stuff like that. Um, if I could, I would love to be able to donate, like have my some of my organs be donated, because then I'm actually then I can kind of like a double version of helping the living, where it's like, okay, I can help
Mm.
you live, and then I can also help you with some closure, hopefully,
Right.
right? But like my main thing is that I'm like it'd only be if the body farm would allow like organs to be donated. 'Cause I'm like, in a way, I would really like to be able to help with that closure. And I'm like, we're never going, like, people aren't going to stop killing other people, unfortunately. I do not
Yeah, it's
see
just
that
kind of a
happening.
fact of life.
But it would be nice if we could have quicker closure, even like some of like the cold cases with more closure. Like the idea of like
Mm.
H.H. Holmes and how he could have buried a pile of the bodies, where he put them in concrete and then dumped them into the river, right? Where it's like it'd be
Right.
nice to know, okay, how long would those bodies have been able to, like, could we dig, like, could we get the concrete in order to find the bodies still,
Hmm.
to actually have an idea of how many people he actually killed, to know, okay, this
Right.
is how many he killed, this is how he probably did it. We can now use that information for future
Yeah.
crimes and stuff, right? Like, so I'm like, I don't think that the crimes are going to stop, but being able to solve the crimes quicker may help the
Mm.
crimes to be less, like less of a
Ma-
body count, and to be able to give quicker closure to families, that it's not like that the family pretty much dies off before they can get any
Yeah.
closure.
Yeah. Fewer murders happen if you catch the serial killer at kill number 2 rather than kill number 10. I get you.
Exactly. Yeah. But mainly for me, for like the closure of the families, right?
Yeah.
um that it's quicker to figure it out, or even like quicker to be able to be like, okay, here's the possible places that this body could be and stuff, right? That then you can at least find the body, rather than families who don't ever find the body,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like,
Sorry, I got distracted because I'm looking at like green burial costs in the city that I'm moving to now. Just like out of curiosity, I found 2 cemeteries that do green
is the
burials,
cost of
and
burial also different than the cost of like with the cost of living?
it's
Like, is it also
expensive.
cheaper to be
Holy.
buried than, as like the same way it's cheaper to live?
There's like a whole PDF. Hang on. No, I'm too far down this rabbit hole. Oh yeah, it's like thousands of dollars cheaper.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'm
You
pretty
can
much free
pre-purchase a burial plot.
unless they charge you your shipping fees.
Shipping fees?
Well, it can't be cheap to ship a body. I don't think we have a burial farm in Canada. I think I'd have to go down to the States. I know that there's one in Texas.
I'm curious about that actually. Wait, I'm sure there's something like that in Canada though.
Oh, nope, there's a body farm in Quebec that opened
Anyway,
in
and
two
of course
that
it's in Quebec.
it opened in 2020, spring of 2020.
All right, that's good time. Well, conveniently timed for us being
It's
on
the
the
first
subject.
body farm in Canada,
Wow.
because they're particularly interested in understanding what happens when a body is in sub-zero temperatures, when there's a lot of snow on the ground, and how that freeze and then the thaw process might actually change the rate of decomposition. Because
That
most
makes a lot of
facilities are in like the
sense for.
really warm climates,
Hmm.
where I'm like, why the heck did we not think of this like earlier? Like,
Well, some of that we just know from the people who keep dying up on Mount Everest, thinking that they're mountaineers and then going up unexperienced.
yep. There's a YouTube show that I really enjoy, and they do a series where it's like food of history, and so they
Mm.
were doing like, here's what could have been eaten, like, or sorry, they had the actual menus and stuff, right? But it was like, here's what whereas they didn't do the actual first Everest climb. They did,
Mm.
these are the foods that were made for like the pre-Everest climbs because this is what didn't work for actually doing Everest.
Okay.
Kind of a thing. So it's like this is what could have been the first meal
Yeah.
on the top of Everest. And one of the people on the show they do like a character from that time frame. So they did a Yeti character, and the Yeti was like,
Okay.
where they're like, yeah, this is how many people have died on Everest. I can account for 80 of them by accident. That was basically like, I just wanted to be friends, and then they accidentally went flying off the mountain in fear of me.
And then how did that happen? What a weird coincidence that this keeps happening.
And so right where I'm just like, that is freaking hilarious.
Oh no. That's funny. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's cemeteries and burial traditions.
Yeah.
And now everybody knows what we want, so they can help fight for it if our families decide not to do it.
If you're listening to this and you know us personally, this is the thing. This is the statement. This is our will and testament.
I will ensure that all legal
I don't think it's
people
legally
have a
binding at
copy
all.
of this so they know.
You know what we want now, though. And if you don't do it, we'll haunt you. We'll come back from the dead and we'll spook up your kitchens and throw all your books around and whisper creepy things in the middle of the night.
My family knows that this is what I want because I've told them multiple times that this is what they're doing.
Fair enough.
But now they know that
Yeah.
there's a place in Quebec that you can send me to. You don't have to ship me down to the States. You don't have to ship me across to
There you go.
Australia, New Zealand.
A little bit, a little bit less expensive shipping fees.
Exactly. Hey, if you want to, you can deliver me personally. Have a nice trip in Quebec.
Have a road trip with a casket in the back. It's like what are they called? Rent a hearse. Rent a hearse and just go on a family road trip.
I mean,
Sounds
it's
okay.
like the
That
Queen
sounds like
had. The
some
Queen had a
Spanish.
whole friggin' like little road trip through England for hers. Why can't I have one across Canada? I haven't done a road trip across Canada.
It's like a bucket list, but like after you've died.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are super important conversations to have though, and like it's never too early to start talking about them because you never know what's gonna happen.
Exactly. And you can change your mind. As new technologies and stuff come up, you can change your mind.
Totally.
Because I might have to add in that I want to be part of an ossuary chandelier after you've done all of your experiments on my body.
Ashley wants to be made into a chandelier, confirmed.
Yeah, after the body farm experiments, then you can turn me
After
into a
the body
chandelier.
farm. When they're done with your bones from the body farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, then a chandelier.
Even if
Not
they
an
want
anthropology
even if they
course or
want a
anything like
chandelier
that.
at the body
Chandelier.
farm. I mean, I could be a chandelier at the body farm. That's okay.
Chandelier at the body farm, Ashley. Oh boy.
But yeah, on that note, we'll definitely make sure to let you guys all know when our next episode is going to be. Probably, maybe we'll try to do one for Halloween still.
That would be fun if we can get it done on time. I don't know.
We'll give it a go.
We'll try.
If not, then probably the week after Halloween.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll definitely let you guys know. And yeah, have a good one, everyone.